What I'm interested in initially is this idea of going back to where you grew up, to write the book. And it's not purely an autobiographical book, is it? There's a lot of stuff going on in there, a lot of ideas.
I mean, it's not autobiographical almost in any way whatsoever. Why I called it a hallucinated oral history was, to me, it's about possibility and the possibilities of that place and time. In fact, the possibilities of any place when you realise that wherever you are is the centre of the world. Now, the generation of people who I'm writing about in that book, the post-punk years, I'm a little bit too young to be part of that. So in a way, it's a fantasy of what might have happened. And so I would be downtown with my gran on like a Saturday afternoon, and I would see these incredible looking characters, dressed with like skin tight black trousers, a leather jacket, a t-shirt with a rip. I always remember one guy had where his nipple was exposed. And to me, this was like street art. It was like performance art. It was like a glimpse of the future. And I thought there was something incredibly brave, especially being in a small town. I mean, one of the bylines of the book is, it's not easy being Iggy Pop in Airdrie. It's really fucking not. It's harder being Iggy Pop at Airdrie than it is being Iggy Pop. It takes a degree of commitment to art to be able to do that. So I began to think, wow, what were the possibilities of that time? What could have happened? And I wanted to write about the possibilities of a small town in a way in which they haven't really been written about before. I wanted to avoid the cliches of the sort of pro-novel. Isn't it hard to grow up in a northern town, school of hard knocks, everyone's on drugs, everyone's fighting, everyone wants to escape. I wanted to show the romantic side of small towns. You know what I mean? So I wanted the book to be a romance. But in a way, to tell the story of post-punk, it had to be fictional. It couldn't even be autobiographical, and it couldn't be non-fiction, because it occurred to me that the true story of post-punk is the story of the artists and musicians who never made a record, who played 2 shows, who recorded 1 demo cassette, who put out 1 issue of a fanzine. This was their contribution. But there's nothing to document that. So I thought, what you have to do is use fiction. Fiction gets closer to the truth of the post-punk experience, but I wanted to ground it in the reality of a small town. So I wanted to create a novel that seemed as if it could be real, but that was completely hallucinated at the same time, but yet almost was like a field guide to that time and place. I included indexes and appendices because I wanted people to be able to visit the sites, the places where things didn't take place, but yet which would allow them to get closer to the psychic reality of that time and place.
What is it about small towns that incubated this kind of culture? Because I'm fascinated I grew up through post-punk. Mm-hmm. And to me, the real, like you're saying, the real story of post-punk was the small towns, not the big cities, not where everybody had yearned to get to the big cities. They thought this is where the action was. But really, it was festering in these weird little places, like where I grew in Blackpool, where you grew up in Airdrie. What was it about those kind of places that the culture went so extreme in a way?
It's so extreme. I think that's key. I think somehow the sort of cultural isolation encouraged a much more extreme manifestation of what was going on, or a more extreme reading, or in fact a more extreme misreading, let me say, of what was going on. And that's what I think post-punk was about, but especially in these little towns. My example would be, think about the Sex Pistols. When the Sex Pistols first came out, and you were reading about this punk group, a lot of people said there's this group who cannot play their instruments, who don't want to play their instruments, and yet are making music. And so I think if you're culturally a little bit disenfranchised and cut off, you kind of riff on that idea. People would be saying, have you heard about this group where they can't play their instruments? Mm-hmm. And so they would form a group even though they couldn't play their instruments. And then they would hear the Sex Pistols and they would realise, we've outstripped and exceeded their vision, because actually when you hear the Sex Pistols, I'm sorry, but if you're not a musician, you can't play the songs on the Sex Pistols album. You simply can't. But in a way, when you're in a small town, you kind of take the culture at its word. You have total faith and belief in it. And in doing that, you exceed the remit that they had in the first place. I always think of it as a sort of cultural mishearing, a cultural mistake. And part of the book, I think someone says, how interesting is it to be right? It's much more interesting to be wrong, in a way, because in a way, you make the mistakes that allow you to sort of reshuffle and recreate forms. I always think about feedback. Feedback was always something that was wrong. It was the jobbing musician's nightmare. And then suddenly Hendrix uses it and creates a whole new alphabet out of it. So in a way, I think what happened with DIY and post-punk in the small towns is they exceeded. They made a whole new alphabet out of the tenets that punk were supposedly about, but actually never fully delivered us from.
The towns themselves also fed into this. A place like Airdrie, which, let's be fair, it probably seen its heyday, hasn't it? This, we're talking about by the 70s.
So it had, yeah.
The things are getting boarded up. It's crumbling. There's not as one with a better phrase, there's no future, is there? So the actual kind of the geographical, architectural backdrops, would this be feeding in as well?
Absolutely. I think that in a way, when you look around a town like Airdrie or a small northern town at the time, and and it seems like there's no future, in a way, you need to create the future. The future is something that has to be built by you in a way, and I think it really felt like that in the time. And it also felt like it was possible to build the future even in Airdrie, and it was possible to come together. And I wonder what's changed. I mean, if Airdrie was past its heyday now, you should see it these days. You know, sorry, it was past heyday then, you should see it these days. It's even more difficult, I think, in a way. But I think back then, one of the things that interested in me was the way people interacted with culture and how it's changed. And one of the things I think that's changed is the concept of the quest. In other words, not the art itself, but the finding of it, the journey towards it, the initiatory aspect of approaching it. I think that may be gone in an age of easy information. Where's the initiation in finding this shit out? You know, you would pick up, say, a 7-inch or a record by some group, you'd love it. You and your friends would then try and put the discography together. You'd go into other record shops, you'd find another one, you'd be like, this is the same guy, or this is on the same label. You know, and you start to join the dots, or you'd have to get the train to Dundee to see this gig, and afterwards you'd come home with 2 7-inches. And it was the travel on the train, it was the missing the train, it was sleeping at a bus stop, it was your dad picking you up in the car. All these things were part of the experience, the seeking out of art. In a way, it wasn't about the art itself, it was about where it took you. You know, and so I wonder the experience of interacting with art, how it's changed. And I think certainly at that time, Airdrie was past its heyday, but it's still, the aspect of the quest was still there, even in Airdrie. It still seemed that the future was something that was waiting to be built, that was asking to be built, and it could be built by you yourself where you were.
Was this something that'd be true of all the small towns? You know, in that area, or Scotland?
I think across the UK, to me, like Airdrie is very much written as every town in this book, every town. And I think almost the specifics are what make it universal. I wanted it to be ultra specific in order to get to a weird universality. So I would always name streets, shops, all these things that you would associate with Airdrie. And funnily enough, the closer I get, the deeper I got into that, the more it seemed like a universal experience, I thought. You know what I mean?
I mean, in the book, do you tap into the history of Airdrie itself, or is it just a backdrop, like you say? It could be anywhere. It doesn't really matter where it is, even though you name places in it and you use the town's name. It's just, it could be anywhere.
On one hand,
move those names around.
On the one hand, but I do use the history of Airdrie actually quite specifically. For instance, at one point I tell you about how Airdrie has the least mobile population of any town in the UK. That's true, and it's what contributes it to be. It's a weird place. It is a weird place. Airdrie Savings Bank was the oldest independent savings bank in the whole of the UK. It closed just after this memorial device came out, which is weird in one way, and it shows you how even Airdrie is changing in terms of like how all modern cities and towns are changing. But not the reason that it was the oldest independent savings bank is because no one left Airdrie. Airdrie was like a vortex. It's the greatest vortex town in the UK. It's very, very difficult to escape its gravity. But I wanted to say that's not just because it's grim, it's also because it's magical. And what made me early on, well, the poet Jack Spicer is this great line that I always like to refer to. Jack Spicer says that if you're a writer or an artist, things happen to you because they want to be written. And from a very early age, I knew Airdrie happened to me because it wanted to be written. There's a book that came out in the early 1950s called The Book of Eldrite. I read it when I was a kid at primary school. And it's a history of Airdrie compiled by the members of the borough itself. And what fascinated me about it was many things. One, it blew my mind that anyone could write a book about where I live. Because I'm reading like Jack Kerouac or even The Lord of the Rings. As far as I was concerned, things happened in America or Middle-earth or in space, not in Airdrie. You know what I mean? That was my favourite genre. And I was like, wow. And this contributed to the sensation I'm talking about of sort of waking up to being in this, finding out where you are as the centre of the world. And so I read this book, and one of the greatest things that inspired me about it was it goes through like, you know, local history, local legends, how the local government works, all these type of things. They had a section on ghosts of Airdrie. And that blew me away the most. I was like, wow, we even have our own ghosts. That was incredible to me. So right then and there, I began to see how specifically Airdrie was manifesting and wanted to be written and how potentially magical it could be. So yes, I definitely wanted to get into the specifics of it as well. But as I say, every town has its ghosts. You know, that's just Airdrie's.
It's interesting we talk about the ghosts because at the point in time you're writing about, this is people looking to the future, wanting to create a future, like you were saying before.
Yeah.
Momentarily, the ghosts, people weren't thinking about them so much, were they? They were trying trying to remold Airdrie. These 40 or 50 people, imagine that's all it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to create a different version of Airdrie. Was it a momentary blink, or was it?
No, I think it went on for quite a while, but funny, the ghosts allow a different vision of Airdrie. To me, it's funny you say that, because when I heard about the ghost, I never associated the ghost with the past. I thought what they were saying was that reality is pliable. Reality is pliable. If you want to believe in ghosts in Airdrie, well, they're there to be believed in. You know what I mean? If you want to defy the laws of physics, you can do that too. So in the book, a lot of things happen that are plainly could not happen in reality. But actually, those times were weird enough that I almost felt that the laws of physics were up for grabs themselves at those times. I think to get close to the sort of the prosaic madness of the times, you can't use a realist approach, because it wouldn't be true. I don't think social realism gets close to the truth in any way whatsoever. When I read a social realist account of something that happened, I'm just, that's not how it felt. It's simply not how it felt.
It's so black and white.
Exactly.
It's so factual.
Yeah, and it doesn't take in the psychic reality. It doesn't take in the ghosts. It doesn't take in the possibility that we could transform the world. So at one point in the book, there's a group of mannequins called Chinese Moon. They perform in a window of a department store for one week in glorious summer. And in a way, and later on it happens, or it seems to appear, that one of the mannequins might have escaped and actually committed a murder. So this is what I mean. I wanted to have these things where reality is completely up for grabs, because that's what it felt like.
Do you think that was a particular time? We talk about, obviously with the quest to get by music, punk had sort of electric shocked a few people in every town. But do you think that was there anyway? There was kind of a shift in the psychic reality across the whole country, and that punk was actually a reaction to that in a sense? Or which way around is it? Or is it just coincidental?
I do, and I think the psychic reality got deeper and deeper and deeper, because I think, punk set the terms out and sort of a transformation in a kind of social realist way. It was very political. It woke you up to the idea that politics or working these things, you could transform your reality. But then when people ran with it, like post-punk, I mean, one of the great magical revivals, the last three great magical revivals, there's probably another one going on recently, but I would say were like late 19th century, 1960s, early 1980s. Early 90s were one of the great magical occult revival, because I think the corollary that went hand in hand with punk saying you can transform your reality, well, it went to the point where you could actually transform reality. You could actually recreate reality, So I think we got deeper and deeper and deeper into these transformative technologies, is what people would like to call them, and I think there's something to that.
The key phrase there, the transforming of reality. I mean, I think that was the result, the knock-on effect, whether it's intentional or not, of that period, wasn't it? So,
absolutely.
I mean, that was a message you would get from it. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing that people in Airdrie, these people were probably 16 or 17, actually transformed the reality. And the catwalk went from London to the high street in Airdrie.
That's exactly, the catwalk was the high street in Airdrie. That's what I mean when I was outside the shop, the shops in the city centre, and you would just be in awe that the characters were going by, displaying themselves. In a way, people display themselves now on Instagram and things like that, but I much preferred that of having a random encounter on a dangerous street with some guy looking fucking amazing than in the safe space of the internet, because it seemed dangerous. You know what I mean? I remember there was a guy who named himself Hamburger Lady. He died quite young from climbing up on top of an old abandoned industrial structure in a quarry where he fell and died. But he was a remarkable looking man, and I certainly looked up to him at the time, and he was always completely striking. He would wear makeup and silver leggings, and he was called Hamburger Lady because he had Hamburger Lady written on the back of his leather jacket after throbbing gristle, of course. And I remember walking along the road with him in Airdrie once, and a car slowed down, and they rolled down the window and they threw a loaf of pan bread as it kind of bounced off his head, and then they drove off. And I remember thinking, that's the best review ever of his catwalk performance. And also, I mean, throwing a spear on a loaf of pan bread in Airdrie, that's a big sacrifice. So it meant a lot, you know what I mean?
And what was his reaction? Did it strengthen his resolve?
Bounced off his head and he kept walking as if it never happened. Yeah, totally. He was used to it. He was bringing it on.
Those people were tough, weren't they?
He was brave enough to take it. You had to be. Yeah. If you're going to step out like that, you had to realise how to handle yourself,
So the books, it kind of looks at this, it reflects it, but examines the reasons why these people actually, why Hamburger Lady became Hamburger Lady.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what it really is about, ultimately, I think, is how transformative can a stray encounter with art be? And in a way, how transformative can it be? How seriously you take it. And it's funny, I've talked about this, I was doing an interview the other day, we were talking about the book, and one guy said, I think it's really funny the way you lampoon the pretentiousness of some of the people at the time, or the pompousness. And I had no understanding what he meant, because I was like, no, you're so wrong. Even at their most pretentious, I stand up for it, because pretentiousness was a word that was used to keep you in your place. Pretentiousness, in a working class town, pretentiousness is what shoots down any approach to art. You've got a Penguin Classic in your pocket, you've got a hair combed in an extravagant fashion, you're pretentious. I hate that word. No, you're not. Pretentious is just a word invented to crush other people's aspirations, especially in working class towns.
It should be taken as a compliment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was the most pretentious kid of all time.
And you say you're a late comer to this. I mean, was there much of this feeling left, or were you very much on the coattails of it when you...
Oh no, there definitely was left. I mean, my big initiation was definitely falling in with people who were writing fanzines, who would travel in to Glasgow the weekend and see shows, who had record collections, you know.
So would you be like the youngest kid on that scene?
I was the youngest kid on that scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was underage when I was first going to shows and things like that, and it was definitely a case of people sort of taking the wee naive guy under their arm and allowing me to go into Glasgow with them and stuff. But that's what I mean in terms of initiation. You know, they'd be smoking marijuana or talking about their multiple sexual relationships, and you know, and the literature they were reading, and you know, I still remember hearing the first Velvet Underground album when the flat that these two girls lived in Airdrie, and it felt like these flats opened onto a parallel universe when I walked into them.
Like Narnia through the cupboard.
Yeah, through the cupboard.
Yeah,
It was felt that, you know,
Yeah.
because you know, I was a teenage science fiction fan. My countercultural stuff came through. Sci-fi, definitely, and the first time I ever saw DIY culture, it was comics and sci-fi fanzines. So I and that really appealed to me. And then I discovered underground music by realising there was the equivalent in music, and it was underground and experimental, and they were self-publishing. And then I began to hook up with a network of people who were in Airdrie doing that. So I went from, you know, being in the astronomy club and being into science fiction to being in with all the guys and girls smoking marijuana, listening to the Velvets, dressing in black and going into Glasgow the weekend. But in a way, they were both equally eccentric. And that's why I included in Airdrie all these other eccentrics, because actually hidden behind the scenes in Airdrie, there's every type of eccentricity, as there is in every small town, you know?
So in a sense, it's like almost living the comic book in real life. You know, dressing up as superheroes or whatever.
Alter egos. It's absolutely true. There's something to be said for that. You assume your alter ego.
Trying to colour in reality, just make it
was always a big thing.
That
was always a big thing, definitely. And you do it by how you colour yourself, really, as you walk. You do it in how you walk down the street. These guys probably transformed my life in terms of initiating experience by the way they moved, as much as by the records they bought and played me, or by. Or,
they weren't cowed.
Exactly. They walked down. They had swagger. You know, swagger in Airdrie is like, it's a difficult proposition.
So, how much research? I mean, obviously you grew up in Airdrie. Do you actually research all of that, or do you use your own memories, or do you kind of take a notion, an idea of the city and explore, or the town and explore it from there, or did you go back a lot? Not obviously go back to visit the in-laws, whatever, but you go back with the idea of writing a book and thinking about it, sitting in cafes, watching what was going past, or you're just using it as a backdrop?
No, I did no research whatsoever, and I avoided going back when I was writing it, because I didn't want the reality to get in the way of how the book was unfolding in a way. And secondly, in a way, I wrote it in a state of possession. I was possessed by those characters, and those characters would sort of talk through me and have their own stories. So it was. I think research is a way of actually not doing the work. Research gets in the way of creativity anyway. And every time I think I need to do a little bit of research, I know I'm avoiding the work of writing itself, and I'm blocking voices from coming through. And it was quite an experience, because characters would come through fully formed, talking in strange voices, and they would also behave in often appalling and really disappointing ways, which said to me that they had their own reality. So I let them do that. I let them go in Airdrie where they wanted to go. I let them behave in those kind of ways. So no, I was very, very wary of not doing any research during the actual writing of it.
Will the characters be composites of people you already knew, or they just be completely different? You know, they're just made up characters placed in this kind of backdrop of a variation.
There's some are completely invented, and there's some of the stories that happen in the book are real stories that I heard, or I heard second hand, or somebody else told me happened in Airdrie. I would say half of them are composites and half of them are completely invented.
It's an interesting thing you were talking about before we started the interview, this idea that people now come to you thinking your book is actually the reality of the whole thing, and they're arguing with you about a made-up character being a real character.
I think it's in the way the book is presented, it does sort of blur the lines between fiction and non-fiction, although it is a novel and it is fiction. But what I start to think is, can art or can art retrospectively create a reality? You know, in other words, can it change the past or how people interpret it? Well, of course it can. I mean, we see the whole of the past through art in so many ways, but what's been freaking me out is when people come up to you and tell you parts of the book are true. So there's a couple of, some of the most unlikely ones. There's one, I was talking about the idea of waking up to the fact that you're in the centre of the world, where you are. And throughout this is memorial device, there are characters who are engaged in art projects that are very much about that. They're ways of waking you up to where you are. One of my favourite ones is there's a thing called Gartley Gallery of Geomancy and Geographic Speculation, GGGGS. And what that consists of is that a girl squats on an abandoned council house. She doesn't do anything. It just still looks like she furnishes it like a bland council house. She doesn't do anything else. She puts GGGGS over the door and she says it's open for viewings 24 hours a day. She advertises it in the library like an art installation. So you get people coming up and creeping into this house, and they're creeping around and they're reading incredible significance into how like tiles are laid out, or a stain on the sideboard, or the position of the television. And it's as if they're seeing their own reality through God's eyes. So it's an attempt to wake you up to where you are. And I love that art project. And I dreamt it up. Thought I did. I dreamt it up. I thought it'd be a great idea. So one night I'm in a bar, and the guy comes over to me and says, "Are you David Keenan?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he's like, "Are you the guy that wrote this as memorial device?" I was like, "Yeah. And he was like, "I'm from Kilmarnock." First I was a little nervous because I do criticise Kilmarnock a little bit in the book. Thought I was maybe going to get a doing or something.
The old local rivalries.
Yeah, totally, yeah. And that's
yeah.
why at one point some guy does sink the book into Kilmarnock and he claims that they eat slugs down there and shit like that, you know what I mean? So he was like, "Yeah, I came from Kilmarnock." And I was like, "Yeah, great." And he said, "Do you know that Gartley Gallery of Geomancy and Geographic Speculation?" I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Everybody was up to that in Kilmarnock back then." And you were like, "What?" Everyone was up to squatting council houses as installations that were open 24 hours a day. It seems like, I was like, I made that up. But he's completely convinced of the reality of it, and he remembers people doing it. So you wonder if there's this retrospective thing. And only recently, I'm in Airdrie, doing a talk about this as memorial device at Airdrie Library. And a guy comes up to me and says, "So everyone in your book's based on a real character, huh?" And I was like, "No, none of them are." And he was like, "Come on, what about Big Patty from Memorial Device?" And I was like, "No, I made him up." And he was like, "No." And you said he lives at the top of South Bridge Street. He does live at the top of South Bridge Street, he said. He said, "But the only thing you got wrong is, you say he lives in a flat, he actually lives in a bungalow." And so you start to wonder, are you retrospectively creating this? It's uncanny.
So in a sense, our realities are just a collection of myths, half-remembered myths, aren't they?
Absolutely. That's
how we define ourselves.
The story of your life is the myth of your own life, and you choose what myth you want to live in a way, you know? And in a way, yeah, it was as big as that. The characters in the book are trying to choose their own myths totally, but some of them were not able fully to say yes to it or live them completely. And so you see some of these accounts they're remembering the events from decades after, and they feel that they almost let themselves down because they did not take their own life seriously enough. Because they were in Airdrie, they chose to feel marginalised because people said they were, you know? But other people didn't do that and lived it completely. Other people knew you could be Iggy Pop in Airdrie, knew they were Airdrie's Iggy Pop, or their own name, of course, ultimately, but that version of it. But other people let themselves down. And why? Because they weren't up to their own myth. It's a big ask, but that's the story of your life.
Would you say that's the real crux of the book?
Well, live your own myth.
This idea, yeah, the idea, that, if the people who dare, someone didn't dare enough, and would you say that's, maybe it's a lesson to ever be learned, and there's always things to be learned from books, of course, but from a book like that, would you say that's a very key lesson?
Yes, I would say, I think that can be the tragedy of your life in a way, to not be able to be up to live your own myth. The tragedy, and a lot of the characters are coming to realise that,
So you talk about other books, you wrote that really fantastic book on industrial music, and a lot of those themes in that are very similar, I think, this idea. When I think about it, a lot of the very esoteric, interesting music comes out of towns you never expect. Throbbing Gristle coming out of Hull.
Yeah.
Cabaret Voltaire, 1974 in Sheffield. Sheffield's a hip town now, but it was a backwater then, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even bands like Bauhaus come out of Northampton. This thing kind of goes on. These people, these are like characters out of your book in a sense, aren't they? Just...
Absolutely. I mean, one real life person who does get the nod in the book is Cozy Fanny Tutti. I mean, there's definitely a hint of her in Vanity, who's also a porn star, who's Airdrie's porn star, and working with the sex industry in an artistic way. Yes, that's definitely true. And coming out of all these small towns at the time, yes, I think what they had in common as well is we're going back to the idea of the quest. For me, someone like Throbbing Gristle and also someone like Crass are like they provided the alternative information centres. It wasn't just about the music. Pre-internet, it was hard to find all these alternative sources of information, and people like TG through their industrial newsletters and people like Crass brought all this alternative information together. So it wasn't just about the music. It was all these different ways and strategies to transform your life. And that was so vitally important, these alternative information centres. That was what was so big for me about these things, and the fact they existed in little small towns that you could access. The fact that these information centres were not London was absolutely key.
And they were doing it from the fringes, Crass were in Epping Forest. And even further out is Throbbing Griston Hall, doing really interesting things for several years. But they could have moved to London. They moved to London in the end. But, I'm just fascinated with this idea and how much it would feed into your idea of your book as well, because the book about industrial music you did before, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. And they totally have something in common. I think what happens perhaps if you move to London, there's suddenly an information overload. And I think maybe you lose your hunger, but you also lose, there's not the urgency to create your own world. If this cultural world exists around you, you tend to become a consumer a little bit. Well, what culture are you going to consume in Airdrie? The NME once a week, you know what I mean? That's it. You really have to create your own. And I think that's really vital. And I think that was part of what happened with many of these industrial groups. And another thing about living your own myth, coming to terms with the truth of yourself, I think industrial music is, I'm really not interested in critique. I'm not interested in critique at all. I'm always interested in saying yes. That's why I wanted to write a positive, affirmative book about a difficult town. I want to say yes. And I think actually industrial music, the Great Industrial Music Project, was not ultimately a sort of negative transgressive project. It was a very bold and brave attempt to say yes even to difficulty, to say yes even to dark stuff, to say yes to suffering, to say yes to the dark side of reality. And in a way, what they did was they went out and investigated this culture as deeply as they could in order, in a way, to kind of neutralise it. I always remember John Balance from Coil talking about how he was scared of the dark. He was absolutely scared of the dark. So he made himself sleep out in the woods overnight. The industrial project is basically sleeping in the woods until you neutralise any fear of darkness. That's what it felt like to me.
A bit like the Agora holy men meditating on death, the burning ghats.
Absolutely.
The Ganges, that
Absolutely.
kind of thing, confronting your biggest fear.
But these were holy men. At one point, there was a punk called Street Hassle, and this is Memorial Device, and he said he compares himself to a hermit in the desert hanging from one toe to get enlightenment, only he says, normally I'm drunk and I'm lying upside down on the Cenotaph monument in Coatbridge. But to me, they were holy men. They were out there trying to do that. I totally agree with that. And these are rituals to bring yourself closer to the full spectrum of what it means to be alive. And to me, that was an incredible project. And the fact that people in small towns were doing this, and this is what I mean by post-punk industrial. It was like a mass existentialist movement that transformed working class culture,
Yeah, which again, we come back to Cozy, and that's what makes her ultimately possibly one of the most fascinating people in that scene, isn't it? Because it wasn't university, and it's a very male scene.
Yes.
And she's a woman in it, a very strong woman, from a council estate in Hull, and it's fascinating how she ends up in that place. And she did the whole sort of hippie trip before that as well, didn't she?
Cosmosis, and totally. And I mean, what's the most fascinating about Cozy is that she's exactly about what we're talking about living your own myth completely. I mean, Cozy's byline is always like, my life is my art is my life. But my whole thing with art, my belief in the function of art, I don't really think art has to have a function, but if there's one thing I think is important about it, is actually to be able to give up art altogether. I think we're fascinated by people who walk away from art, like Arthur Rimbaud continued to be fascinated by Me Too, because I think there's something about, ultimately, it would be good art should cure yourself of art. Art should cure yourself of the need for art, and then everything you do is art, and you don't need art anymore, and it becomes that. What I'm interested in is how art manifests itself in the way you walk down the street, how you walk through art and go out the other side of it. It's the same as magic. The idea of being a magician, a lifelong person who describes himself as a magician, I'm sorry, mate, that's not very magical. Magic should cure you of magic. If it doesn't cure you of magic, all it means is you're playing it for some kind of role, for some kind of identity. And as long as you're playing it for identity, you're not playing it for keeps in my book, and it's not real.
So would you say you're in a position where you're beyond art, beyond magic? yourself?
I haven't cured myself of art yet. This is my project as well. I'm still writing. I'm obsessively writing. And sometimes I do compare it to demonic possession. In a way, the voices are still in my head. They won't let me rest, but I hope and pray, and I don't know if it's true, that one day I might be able to give up on writing altogether and walk away.
Would you say art's a burden?
It is.
It's a curse.
It is if you're totally working on it. You feel you're being driven by demons. I've come very close to insanity through in the past 10 years of writing non-stop on novels. But my sanity's definitely been challenged, and I think anyone who continually works with words, and as I told you about this as memorial device, I was in a state of possession, and I often am when I'm writing. And the difference is that a magician has a banishing ritual to get rid of these demons at the end of the day. But what do writers have? Writers do not have that. So you need to create. It's very difficult, but you need to create rituals yourself that banish these voices a little bit. And I find that difficult when I work so intensely on a book. The voices remain in my head, and it's hard to switch these voices off.
But don't you enjoy that ride? You know, that's madness, that energy, that's the psychic energy of creativity.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that's why I do it. I can't give it up. I write every day in my life and I can't give it up. But just now and then, I would like to be able to shut the voices off and sit blankly for hours. I can't do it at the moment. But I hope that at some point up ahead, I'm going to get to the point where I'm able to do that and walk away. But in a way, I think I'm here to write these books. It's what I'm here to do. You talk about your own myth. My myth is definitely writing all these novels. I have to do it. I have to do it. It's not always easy, but I know I have to, and it's not what I'm here. I know it's what I'm here to do. But I hope at some point I can sit back in tranquility and know my job is done.
Is it the idea of writing the books or the actual physical manifestation of writing the books that's the most addictive? You know,
The writing.
the writing. So when you're in there, 2 lines in, when we hit the gear, it's just that rush. Are you thrilled by the creativity?
Oh, there's nothing like it. And it's,
You're sitting there, you actually look at the stuff that's going down the page going, wow, where's this stuff coming from?
Completely. Yeah. I mean, I don't care what any writer says, and this is why I have no interest in anything like, creative writing courses or anything like that. It's absolutely nonsense, because I'm sorry, you cannot teach this shit. You cannot. You can teach you how to write generic books. You can teach you how to write a crime novel or science fiction novel, because there are certain tenets that you can get down there. But when you're actually writing, I'm sorry, there is not a single writer that's able to rationally articulate what is going on. I don't even think you can take full responsibility for it. You just can't, because it comes out of nowhere. It's magical, it is jaw-dropping, it's weird, it's like a religious experience. And also, not only does it come out, there was an organising principle behind it. If you can sit back, and some points I'll get to a point in the book and I'll be like, I have no idea where this book is going. It seems out of control. I didn't expect any of this. But see if you have faith to get past that doubt and keep going, everything resolves itself. And you go back and there are all these uncanny resonances throughout it. It's very, very difficult to articulate that process, but it is close to magic and it's absolutely addictive. And when you're in there, there's no other feeling like it.
Do you prefer it to music? Because you spent a lot of time playing music, playing in bands. Some you liked more than others.
Massively.
Yeah.
Massively. I mean, the cliche is, like music journalists are like frustrated musicians. I was like a musician that was a frustrated music journalist. I wanted to write about it much more than I wanted to play. I wanted to write about it as much as I wanted to listen to it. In fact, one of the big transformative things for me was when I encountered Lester Bangs for the first time when Psychotic Reactions came out, which I think was probably 87, 88, the first collection of his work. And to me, I mean, I read it and I was like, wow, this reads as good as my favourite records. And then I knew I wanted to write about music, but I did not want to be a critic. I'm not interested in critique. Sure, if you force me to write about a record I don't like, I'm going to pan it. But I do not set out to write about records I don't like. I saw myself more as an evangelist, but I saw myself even more as someone who was writing stuff that stood next to the music, that was enjoyable to read as the music was to listen to. I wanted to write pieces that were equal to the music.
Reflecting the music with the words?
Absolutely.
Not describing it, just the energy.
Yeah. And that's what, the energy was always about.
That's what Lester Bangs does, isn't it?
Exactly. Minting a language that would not betray the music itself. I think when you stand at the side of the dance floor and with your notepad out and you analyse like what's happening and what this new beat means or what it means culturally and stuff like that, I'm sorry, you're too out of it to discuss it. You're too removed from it.
Yeah.
You either get down or you get out. That's my thing for music journalists. And you know what? Most music journalists cannot fucking get down. So I don't listen to them.
Sometimes the greatest review is just like, wow.
Yeah, fuck. It's that gush of pure energy. Just like when you stick on a 7-inch thing when it's just 3 minutes of wow.
Yeah. I mean, how dare you put this into sentences?
In a way, yes. Yeah. But you can. But you have to mint a new language. And for me, I think music journalism is closest to, if you want to talk about another style of writing, science fiction. Because science fiction is something where you have to mint a language about something that is very nebulous, but that could possibly be completely transformative. And so I think techniques like synesthesia, like being able to see colours, the sounds and things like that, they work very well. So minting a language for music journalism, I think, is coming up with the similar thing of describing an alien planet. That's what it was. And I felt like that. When I heard The Velvet Underground, it was like touching down on an alien planet. And the only thing I could compare it to was reading like an Arthur C. Clarke novel. That's how outlandish it felt to me.
A lot of crossovers between the two genres, of course.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
Hawkwind were a big early favourite of mine, and that was because they totally connected with both these words, with like Michael Moorcock and things like that.
It's
You
a
know?
really fascinating band. A very underrated, fascinating
Absolutely.
band. Yeah.
Totally.
They're kind of nearly everything we talked about. They've kind of touched on some.
Absolutely.
Some point,
Well, it's funny when I met people think of them as like hippies and stuff like that. And when I met Lemmy, I asked about him about Hawkwind, and I asked him about how like they came out of the kind of hippie scene, and he kind of laughed and he said, "Hippies." He said Hawkwind were a black fucking nightmare. And I thought, what a brilliant way of putting it, a black fucking nightmare, you know?
Yeah.
So I think my passion and my obsession with language as a sort of transformative thing, or sort of way of transforming energy, definitely came out of reading music journalism and things like that. But then, when I was in my early 30s, after spending a long time as a music journalist, I began to feel this urge to have for bigger projects, for things that would take years to complete, and I began writing a series of novels. And I was so possessed and caught up in writing these novels that I wrote 6 novels, one after the other, without stopping or without submitting them to any editors or agents over a course of 10 years. Because I was in a state of near complete possession. And I was so in love with the act of creativity. I was working a job at the time. I ran a record shop called Volcanic Tongue, and I was sometimes working till like 10 p.m. I would get home, have something to eat, open my beer, and from 11 till 2 I would write every single night for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it was only when I got a contact for an editor at Faber and Faber, a guy called Lee Braxton, who I'd heard of, I began to think maybe I should. This is a cue that I should submit a book, because I had no idea how to get a book published. Even though I was a published music writer, I had no contacts in the literary world. I didn't know how to get an agent. Occasionally, I would buy that awful book, the Artist and Writer's Yearbook that everyone tells you to get, and I would just look through it, and my heart would sink, and I'd put it on the shelf, and I'd say, I'm just going to go back to writing. You know what I mean? This is all too complicated. You know. But I was caught up. I was possessed for that period of time. Just didn't work.
Yeah, it's a very different discipline, like pouring out a book and then having to hustle it to somebody in it. It's the opposite end of the scale, really, isn't it?
It is. Well, I always felt, you know what, when you're on, you're on. Don't worry about publishing. The work is the most important. The work, it's always about the work. Do the work. So when I was on, I was writing, I was like, well, and it felt like possession. I was like, well, I don't know when this is going to dry up. You always think of Dylan, you know, like post 66 or something, where he calls it the great forgetting. He almost says that he was unable, he didn't know how he used to be able to write, and he couldn't get back to that. Could happen to anyone at any time. So I thought, while I'm writing these books, I'm not going to stop. While it's on. Don't stop, you know?
But probably Dylan was thinking about it too much. You get to that point where you think, you overthink, you outthink yourself. I think that's where you dry up a lot of people.
Yeah, and also what happens now that I have a published book is that I wonder, do you write differently? Now you've had a book out, now you've had reactions to your book, you probably do. So I wanted to write as many books as I could before anyone
like
had
tainted by success in a sense, expectation.
By expectation as well, and by other people's take on your book, which is fine, but you've got to throw it out there and let it have its own life. Book's called This Is Memorial Device, and I wanted it to be like an organic entity that had a life of its own. People in the book, people say quite a lot, what is a memorial device? And someone will say, well, is it a penknife? Is it like a pocket watch? And someone says, I think it's a gravestone, you know, a marker. But actually, a memorial device has to be something that's organic and alive. And that's why I wanted to have so many disparate voices in it. That's why I wanted to associate a time and place that people knew. And that's why I even wanted to have street names in there that were real. Because I thought that in order to make it a true memorial device, it had to be alive. My big thing about how I structured it was that I had this idea. It kind of comes from Burroughs, and it also comes from Jewish Kabbalah, which are two things I'm very interested in and which have a lot in common. I think if you're in any way interested in words, you'd be interested in Kabbalah. And my whole theory was that in the way that Judaism has this incredible thing of turning the letters, turning the words, and as if you're going to get to some kind of enlightenment or enlightened reality just by continually playing with language. I thought to myself, well, you know what? That's what Northerners do. That's what Scottish people do. We believe that patter can transform reality. So I began to see how there was a working class Kabbalah in some kind of way. So then I began to have this idea that came from a misreading again. Misreadings are so important throughout all my books and my thought. And William Burroughs has a book called, a novel called The Cities of the Red Night. I'd never read it. And I avoided reading it because I had this idea about what the title meant. I had a revelation that the cities of the Red Night were the internal organs of the body. You know, and it made so much sense to me. And then I began to think, wow, is he mapped his book according to the organs of the body? And then I began to think of that idea of the Golem that exists in Kabbalah and Judaism, where you can make this thing out of clay, out of something that's inert, but if you write the correct Hebrew letters on the back of its neck, it becomes something that's alive. And I began to think, wow, can you create something that's alive through language? So my map, I had two structures. One is there's 26 chapters. That's the 26 letters of the alphabet, because I had this idea that letters on their own are lonely, but words are a form of love play for letters that then births some kind of organic form. And then secondly, I had the idea that I would turn the book into like an Adam Cademon, into a Golem, into the original Adam. And what I would do is I structured it by structuring it like a body where individual chapters were like individual organs, and the plot strands were the bloodstreams that connected them all. So that became the structural conceit.
Do you actually do this as the foundation of the book, or do you already start writing the book and you kind of use this to order the book?
As I began writing it, I realised that what was happening. A lot of the characters throughout the book began talking about organs and how organs speak to each other, and they naturally began doing that. And I began realising that was the organic form the book demanded. In order to be a memorial device, it had to have an organic component that seemed alive. And when I read Williams Burroughs' books, they seem like a reality that you can enter in and out of. And so the 26 chapters, you read it through linearly, you will get the story, plot by stealth, but it does appear as you go through. You start to see it's a story of a memorial device and Lucas Black and stuff like that. But also, you can enter it in any chapter you can read standalone, and also you can read it backwards to front and you'll get a different take as well. So I wanted all these different points of entry. Like Burroughs, you enter into its reality and you can enter it in many different ways.
Do you think Airdrie itself is organic? You know, the town becomes an organic entity.
There are so many different Airdries, absolutely,
Yeah.
for so many different people. And that's what I mean. Most people do think of Airdrie. Someone reviewed the book who said he lived in Airdrie, and he said some of the things that David Keenan says that happened in Airdrie are totally ridiculous. He was like, all I remember is people taking speed and drinking Buckfast. And I was like, that's a failure of imagination on your part, because I was reading Albert Camus in a small house in Airdrie, and I knew other people that were. And a failure of imagination even in someone who lives there. And that's what I mean. Step up to the myth, baby.
I like the idea that there's 1,000 different realities, or
Absolutely.
10,000 realities.
Absolutely, and they're accessible. Yeah. It's down to you. You need to choose them. But a lot of people think, well, how can I choose them? Because mainstream culture says this and it says that, and I'm disenfranchised, and I'm here and I'm there. Well, that's a claiming of your own victimhood. I'd rather claim my own mythology.
So it's there for those who dare. Basically.
It's always a true believer. So, as you say, there's always going to be 30 and 40 people. It's always going to be true believers, ultimately. Even back then, it was a small band. But it's like that John Peel thing. He says, I thought everybody was into this music. And it's like, no, John, you just know everyone that's into it. You know?
And does this tie into this thing that you have about saying yes to the universe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the absolute most important thing. That's the thing that comes out of all art for me. The best art. Because you know what? I'm not interested in critique, and it's really fucking easy. And that's what I don't like about early punk. It's just so fucking easy. You suck, I'm bored. I hate songs about boredom, because they're so, you disenfranchise yourself. What's that? In the book, Big Patty talks about that shitty deterrent situationist cartoon. I don't know if it's I can't remember if it's a Jamie Reed thing or not, but it's a situationist thing. And at one point, they say something, the character says something about there's nothing they won't do to raise the standard of boredom or something. They and boredom? You and boredom. There's nothing to do with it. You invent your own stuff. Boredom is anti-revolutionary, and if you believe you're waiting for somebody else to make you less bored, stay bored. Saying yes is the hardest thing. So making art that critiques, I don't find that interesting. It's so easy. But making art that says yes, that somehow affirms even difficulty, it somehow even affirms suffering, that somehow, that whole Nietzschean idea, one of Nietzsche's incredible things, and one thing that Christianity has single-handedly failed to do, is to sacralise suffering. It's to make even negative things sacred. Because everything ultimately has to be sacred, or nothing is, I think. And it's a difficult challenge, and it's the challenge of modernism. And modernism failed because I think modernism fell back into some kind of pessimism, an easy pessimism, let me say. And when you get to the last line of Ulysses by James Joyce, what is it? Yes, yes I will, yes. What an incredible way to earn one of the great modernist books. And that's always stuck with me. I want all my art and writing to say yes, yes I will, yes.
And you actually got to the last line, Ulysses as well.
Yes, I did, yes.
Which is quite something. Yes to Ulysses. But what you're saying there is actually, in the kernel, the manifesto, or the idea, is how maybe a lot of people in small towns, people like me, people growing up in these kind of places, but that's actually what we thought punk was. It was just like an excuse to do it, wasn't it?
It was permission.
Yeah.
It was permission. That was a big, massive thing for me, a sense of permission. And it's sad, but sometimes you do need it when you're out there in the middle of nowhere. I mean, when I was a kid, I did think we were in Airdrie. And there's that thing about pretentiousness. There's a big thing in working class towns where it's not for us. It's not for the likes of us, this type of stuff. And so you need a little permission to say it's for the likes of anyone who's there to claim it. But permission is important, and permission goes further. So first of all, you've got the permission to be an artist in a non-artistic milieu. That's what punk did. But then what people like the industrial culture did and Burroughs did, they gave you permission to sort of like take the hood off and mess with the wirings a little bit. Whether it was psychedelic drugs, whether it was through magic, whether it was avant-garde literature, to actually, not only can you change Airdrie, you can actually change your own psychic makeup in a way. You know what I mean?
Which then does change the town.
Which absolutely, it totally does. It has this sort of effect, this endless effect.
Yeah, there's always a great argument. Manchester was rebuilt on the ideas that came out of that post-punk period. They eventually rebuilt the whole city in its image, which is
incredible.
Kind of a long line. Obviously, that didn't really happen in Airdrie, did it?
No, it didn't.
Yet.
But it seemed possible. And that's the idea. It seemed possible. And there were 40 believers who believed it was possible. And so on that point, it was transformed. And that's what I mean. Did everyone realise it at the time? Is it possible to... This is a big thing for me, and this is where it comes to saying yes. Is it possible to be aware of the significance of the moment as it's happening? Very, very difficult discipline. It's like a Zen discipline in a way. And the big thing about this memorial device is, was it possible? For some characters it wasn't. For some characters it was. Is it still possible to say yes always to the moment? Or is it only possible to give things significance in retrospect? You know, and I love that Prince line from Sometimes It Snows in April, where he says something like, and love just isn't love until it's past. You know, well, is your life going to be like that? Is your life not your life until you're lying on your deathbed? I would hate to wake up suddenly and say, wow, my life was absolutely fucking amazing. You know?
Yeah.
I want to be able to say it now as it's happening, as it's taking place. And that's the spiritual discipline I got, believe it or not, from punk, post-punk and industrial music. Through the energy of rock writing, through science fiction.
That's the power of it. That's why it's so much more than just a musical fashion, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was. And that's what I mean, but it was a mass existentialist spiritual movement.
Well, on the flip side, like you're saying, the tragedy is that when you've dared to go on the catwalk, you weren't even aware you were on it.
To a certain degree, but then I think I talk about these people as saints, and one of the things that saints would always do is a form of debasing themselves, totally debasing themselves to get to every part of reality. Now, I love, you know, the way people would give themselves these punk names that were deliberately debasing. And I love Kenny Everett's punks because in the way they summed up the, you know, Sid Snot and Gizzard Puke. I love those titles because it's the saintly debasing to get to a sort of level of experience where you're not sheltering yourself from any aspect of it. In fact, you accept the debasement as some kind of spiritual discipline. You know, so I came up with the guy Street Hassle, who's a punk, and this is memorial device. People are in awe of him because he just completely accepted his debasement as some kind of spiritual, and he's elevated it to the form of spiritual praxis.
It's interesting you keep saying spiritual. Would you say you were a spiritual person?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing with a lot of people in the industrial music scene is how they start off being quite extreme and they end up being quite religious, quite Christians, you know, which is, if you're going to pick all the religions in the world, that's like the least trendy one at the time. In the 80s, wasn't it? Whereas now a lot of these people are actually seriously heavily into it.
Yeah, when I say spiritual, I don't believe I don't mean religion or anything like that.
But I'm fascinated. That's probably a double-edged thing. The idea that you are a spiritual person, but I'm also interested why a lot of these other guys became quite Christian as well.
I actually think that it's funny. I actually think that people have an idea that all these industrial types are like sort of serious transgressive Satanists or doing like really weird like sex and violence rituals behind the scenes. Well, my experience of these people, and it relates to what this type of person I was, which is probably why I was drawn in here, was actually they were kind of like mostly nervous geeks. In fact, a little bit fearful. And that's what I mean in a way that they were most attracted to it in a way because they were almost most terrified and appalled by it at the same time. And I think that's what attracted me because when I first began to hear about industrial culture, I was shocked and a little scared. But it made me all the more, I was like, well, why would someone be interested in this? What is in this? But something about it made me go there, made me go into the woods, like Bowen said. And again, these people seem to me some of the softest, gentlest, most intensely moral people I've come across, because you talk about, and I think it's very disappointing when people involved in it fall back on the crutch of religion. I think that's tragic, because the whole point of the project for me was to assemble a morality from scratch that was more in tune with reality. That was the project, you know.
And how would that tie in with your idea of spirituality now?
My idea of spirituality is always saying yes for a start. My idea is that to me is faith. Faith to me is not that good or bad things will happen to you, but faith is simply the ability to say yes to everything as it happens. I have a faith deep down that everything is correct and right, even at its most terrible. And my spiritual practice is constantly saying this, without any other words that judge this. It's absolutely being there in the this. This is it. It's as far as I can say. I don't think I can go any further than that in terms of spiritual practice. So pure acceptance. Pure accept without words. That's the other thing. It's so funny because that's what I mean by hoping to give up words one day. Because I think the one thing that gets in the way of spiritual practice, if you're so caught up in words, because words are always defining your experience. And I think that can be a barrier between the experience, because you immediately say, well, this experience makes me uncomfortable. Or I don't like this type of person. This is the wrong thing I go into. One of my spiritual practices is being involved with lots of different cultures that were perhaps alien to me. I became a boxer as part of my spiritual quest because it was a culture that I'm not very involved in. It's a culture most of the people around me aren't very interested in. All these things. I go to pop concerts. Me and my partner go to a lot of big stadium pop concerts just to experience different culture, to open yourself.
Not to become too narrow.
Never to become a stereotype.
Even in your own world. Trapped even in a world that's open becomes a trap.
The biggest trap of all, I believe, is identity. The biggest trap of all is when you say, I am this. And the trouble, I think, with magicians and magic, like I say, or with industrialists or with transgressives, they say, I am an occultist. I am an industrial music fan. I am this. And I'm like, well, I'm not ready to take any off the peg identity, I like to dress well and I like to go to noise shows. You know what I mean? I just don't want to fall into any sort of stereotypical...
Because people put parameters on it and they say, why are you doing this? Because you are that.
Yeah, and there's just as many in the underground as there are in the mainstream.
Oh, worse.
In a way, because there's certain ways you're allowed to look, there's certain ways you're allowed to act, certain values you're not allowed to hold, and vice versa. I find them all really claustrophobic, So my spiritual practice genuinely has been exploding any idea of who I am constantly, again and again.
So do you find if you're trapping yourself into a corner, you do the opposite to get out of that corner, or not necessarily the opposite, but anything to get out of that trap?
Alistair Crowley has a really great ritual which has worked wonders for me in terms of busting my own cliched ideas of who I am. And he has a thing where he puts a ring on a certain finger one day, and when that ring is on a certain finger, he has a certain set of values that he holds dear and that he sticks to no matter what. And then when he moves the ring onto another finger, he adopts an entirely different set of values.
Kind of like the dice man. With a different...
Yeah, a little bit. I don't do it with the rings so much. I don't like to change the place of my rings. They are where they are. But what I do is I do it with taxi drivers. Because I will take whatever stance a taxi driver has and I'll roll with it even more extreme back at them. And I just use it as a form of spiritual practice. And it's really good because it explodes your own cliched thoughts. It's good to take another stance and live in it for a little bit,
So you're always trying to, deconstruct or just explode?
Explode, preferably explode completely. So I don't identify any of these things. I try as hard as possible to go into every situation with a sort of virgin mindset, with no expectations at all, and without any of my cliched ideas of what this experience will involve.
So in a sense, there's no real right or wrong, is there? There's just...
I ultimately don't believe so. I mean, there's things that will hurt you, and there's things that will make you feel sad, and there's things that will make you feel happy, but I don't believe any of them to be wrong or right.
And does this all feed all the way back into the book itself, back to Airdrie, back to this idea? The catwalk of 40 people, they were seeking this. Not all of them found it, but they were seeking something. They didn't know what they were seeking, but they were seeking something, weren't they? Yeah,
and some of them died for it. Lester Bangs is this great thing. I think it's in his obituary for Peter Laffner from Perubu, etc., etc. And he says, he has this beautiful line, he says, like, Peter died for what torn T-shirts stood for in the battle fires of his emotions. Fucking beautiful. I know guys that died for torn T-shirts. And was it worth it? Yes, it was. Because also, I talk about this in the afterword of English Hidden Reverse, because a lot of people did die, and John Balance died. And John Balance has this quote in the book, which I always thought was beautiful, but which he was unable to live. Ultimately, in one sense, he says something like, we were all very, very nihilistic people back then, but somehow we channeled this into creativity. And ultimately, wasn't the nihilism overthrew him. But at the same time, I thought, do we really mourn that? Do we really mourn? I was actually talking to Cozy Fanny Tootie about this the other day. And as the people we love when they die, do we mourn them if they died according to their own myth and the terms that they created? Why mourn them? And then I remembered, and this is what I talk about in English Hidden Reverse, I then remembered when Tony Wilson was on the radio and they were talking about the death of George Best. And little did we know at the time, I guess Tony Wilson must have had cancer at this point and maybe perhaps knew he was dying himself, because Tony didn't die that long afterwards. And I love Tony Wilson and completely admired him in so many ways. He was somebody who used a Trojan horse to penetrate the culture, and he was good at it, and you need guys like that completely. But they're on this panel about George Best, and every other commentator was saying, oh, what a tragedy, what a tragedy. George Best died through alcoholism. It was a disease, and it was really tragic. It's a shame he couldn't have saved himself. And Tony Wilson said, I've never been able to find this interview, but I was struck by it at the time. Tony Wilson said something along the lines of, what was tragic about George Best? George Best lived and died as George Best. So my whole thing is live and die according to the absolute terms of your own story. There's no tragedy if you live that, you know, and there's no tragedy if you die young through it, as long as that was the arc of your life and it was lived fully. So I began to understand that. At first I thought, well, what a tragedy that they died. And I was like, no, that was the terms of the project. That was the terms they set themselves. They went out there to explore these psychic states, to report back. They knew the risks. It was the story of their lives. It was a mythic arc of their lives. We applaud it. We applaud George Best's death as George Best.
Which is a great point to end on. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.